This conference will now be recorded.
हाँ जी, थोड़ा सा वेबकैम नीचे, थोड़ा सा.
नीचे करना ऊपर करना सर. अब देखिए. ओके सर.
Yes.
जी.
Yeah. Okay.
सर आप बोलें.
Okay. ठीक है, मैं वेबकैम को कर देता हूँ साइड में. So can everyone hear me? Can people at the back hear me? Are you able to hear me at the back? Can people at the back hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So can I start now?
जी सर स्टार्ट.
Okay. Thank you. Very good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Naresh Agarwal, and I'm an associate professor at the School of Library and Information Science at Simmons University in Boston, Massachusetts. And it's a great privilege for me today to be able to talk to you about two of my research areas, that is information behavior and knowledge management, both of which I know are important components in your university. And I bring to you greetings from my home country, India, where I spent my formative years. I'll just speak a line in Urdu. आपके सरजमी पाकिस्तान को एक हिंदुस्तानी का salam. And I grew up in the state called Sikkim, which is a very beautiful Himalayan mountainous state. And this is the high school that I went to. And this is a view of my hometown, Gangtok, in Sikkim. And we just have a brand new airport, which only started operations in October, like about a week back. And I also bring you greetings from Singapore, where I spent 14 years pursuing a PhD as well as a degree in computer engineering before that. And this is just from views from Singapore, and this is Nanyang Technological University, where I studied during my undergrad years. And this is the place where I did my PhD. This is the School of Computing at the National University of Singapore. And I bring you greetings from Boston, Massachusetts. And this is Simmons College, which has just been renamed to Simmons University starting September this year. And it's a very beautiful time of the year. Just 2 days ago, I took these pictures. It's a fall time, and the colors are changing everywhere. And this is what you see around in most places right now. So to come to the topic of my talk, it is the individual or organizational point of view. What is the relationship between information behavior and knowledge management? So these are two terms that we keep hearing about in our field. And the talk that we just had before mine from Professor Miguel touched upon knowledge services and knowledge management and how it links to innovation. And I'll try and link both in knowledge management with this field of information behavior. So let's talk talk first about what information behavior is. Now, if you look at, if you imagine a triangle, and on the one side of the triangle, if you see human beings, and where human beings are could be a student or a faculty member or a staff person in a university in Lahore, or a human being could be a professor calling in from a small town in Massachusetts at midnight right now, or a human being could be a child who's interacting with an iPad, or it could be a person walking down the street staring at his or her iPhone or an Android phone. It could be a student, it could be a knowledge worker working in a company. it could be the politicians, lawyers, doctors, physicians, any number of people who are doing their jobs in different ways. So all of these are people who come under the purview of people who are studied in the field of information science. And when we look at this term, information, this is what many of the schools in this field are beginning to call themselves, like I schools, as there are B schools for business schools. So any amount information was something that, again, Professor Miguel touched in his talk as well. And this idea of information here is something that is difficult to understand, that what is the relationship between data and information and knowledge. And but it is something that we see around all the time. Information is something that's being processed in your minds right now as I'm talking to you. And information is something that we read in the booklets that we have in front of us. And information is something that we consume and something that we produce. And then we have technology. So technology is something that has enabled me today to be able to address you remotely, sitting here right now in Massachusetts, and to be able to talk to you in Lahore right now. So when we have this interaction from human beings to human beings, and often as we produce and consume information, and a lot of times enabled by technology, all of these processes or interactions are collectively in the gamut of interest of information science researchers and information science professionals. Now, a lot of the times, people think of something that surrounds this whole process, and that is termed as context, which is often, either correctly or incorrectly, viewed as a setting where this interaction takes place, which could be the university you're in right now, or it could be a container or an environment that people see as context. But context is also something that is actively produced at a point in time, rather than something which is just out there. So when human beings interact with information and technology, so right now, as I'm interacting with you in this process of giving a talk, there's a certain context to this process. That is, we can say that this context is produced right now as I'm talking to you. There's another point in time when I'm playing with my 3-year-old son or interacting with my 10-year-old daughter. Maybe there's a different context at that point in time. So context is also something that is actively produced. Now, the difference between information behavior and knowledge management can be understood in this term based on context too. So when we are looking at this whole phenomena from an individual's point of view, from an individual human being's point of view, then we can think of it as information behavior or human information behavior. But when we are looking at it from a setting or an organization's point of view, this context could be a university, it could be a library, it could be an archive, it could be a company, it could be even a country or a city. When you look at that larger process and the way knowledge is produced within that whole environment, then that could be seen as knowledge management. So both of these processes or these research areas sort of coexist. The area of information behavior and knowledge management, it is a perspective that matters. Whether when we're looking at it from an organization's point of view, it is called knowledge management. And when we are looking at it from an individual's point of view, it's called information behavior. And sometimes knowledge management has this term called personal knowledge management, in which case that is knowledge management that is concerned from an individual's point of view, and that is closer to this area of information behavior. So I just had a book published recently. This came out in December 2017, and this was on trying to define what this term context means, and it was produced by Morgan and Claypool. This is the link to it, and here I've explored this entire phenomena of context as it applies to this field of information behavior and what we mean by it. And often it is associated with these various notions, such as seeker, which is the person in context, or this person is looking for information, or the situation that produces information, things that surround people, as well as the various identities that people hold, and the degree to which we think of these identities for ourselves and the way we stereotype other people. All of that collectively forms this idea of context as it applies to information behavior. So when you think of context, why context is important? Because if we did not take context into consideration, then we could assume that everyone and everything behaves in a predictable manner. And then there is an attempt to paint everything with a broad stroke of color. So everything we try to look at the world as one similar thing. So when I look at my own life, I see myself as trying to synthesize various things. So when I see something that is different in human beings and different in the way people are, I try to look for what is common in all of us. And that commonality is the process of synthesizing or finding something common. But at the same time, when you look at people, whenever I see something that when people are trying to say that everything is the same, then I try to look for something that is different or what's the difference in the way people are. So this idea of trying to look for what is similar and what is common, what is different is both important. And context matters because context tries to bring that difference into sharper focus. So when we think of what is information behavior is a whole set of essential human activities, which includes the need for information, a need which often arises inside our head. And when we go and look for information, this process of seeking, which can happen alone or with other people collaboratively, it can happen at our workplaces or in everyday life, and it can happen in person when I'm talking to you, or it can also happen virtually as we are interacting right now, mediated by this tool called GoToMeeting. And information behavior also includes other processes like using information and sometimes avoiding information. One of the research areas that I'm working on right now is what happens when, how do people feel when the messages that they send through WhatsApp or MSN Messenger or through other ways are not responded to, or when people do not respond to your calls or emails. And looking at it from the sender's side, but also looking at it from the receiver's side. And so all this, so information avoidance, as we're finding, is something which impacts people greatly, and that's happening a lot right now when people are increasingly connected through smartphones. And also there's this process called information accidental encountering of information, or serendipitous encountering, when we find information serendipitously when we're not really looking for it. So think of when we think of information behavior, the person at the center is this actor or user. Now, Brenda Derwin, who's a very famous researcher in our field, and who came up with the sense-making theory or the sense-making methodology, she defines the actor or the user as a body, mind, heart, spirit, moving through time and space with a past history, a present reality, and future dreams or ambitions. So right now, each one of us in this room, in this auditorium where you're sitting, and for me right now, each one of us is this body, mind, heart, and spirit, which is moving through time and space. And what happens is that when we often conduct research, we say that, okay, let's look at the research of studying the information behavior of librarians, or studying the knowledge management practices of lawyers, or studying the practices of people in China or Asia or America. So there is this process of stereotyping where we try to look people as if they reside in certain buckets. But often this whole process of trying to understand the actor as a person who's a living person who has certain needs and emotions, is a thinking, feeling person with a past history and a certain need at a point in time, and that makes us understand the user as a real person rather than trying to stereotype the user. And in fact, the term user is also stereotype, because then looking at the user from a systems point of view. And here, so the actor could be a knowledge worker, or working person, an analyst, a student, a child, and so on. So this person comes across some need for information. So let's say the need for me is to give a talk to you right now. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but actually your camera is off. Can you please turn on your camera?
Oh, my camera is off?
Your camera is on?
It was on. So you need to do view all webcams on GoToMeeting.
Naresh, we can't see you.
You need to go to the view all webcams.
All webcam. Okay. Okay.
Are you
Now
able to
please continue.
Can you see me now?
Yes. Now please continue.
Okay. Thank you. So when we think of this need for information, right? So this need for information is often produced by a task at hand that I need to work on, or a talk that I need to give right now. So I talk to Professor Kamal and I ask her about need, and sometimes whenever there is a need for information, right, which arises in a particular context, we start looking for information, and that information could be about who are the attendees in this conference right now, or asking people about what is the technology setup, and so on. So that's when we start looking for information, and when we ask, it might happen that we ask for this information to people that we interact with, or we go to a library for certain books, or we look at computer-based systems, and that process is the process of searching or retrieval. And we might be looking at these systems either as desktops or laptops or tablets or smartphones. So all of these are various kinds of media or devices which help us reach the information that we're looking for. And these are information sources, and sometimes we encounter information serendipitously when we're not really looking for it. So all of these various kinds of sources, whether human sources or impersonal sources like books or electronic sources, they give rise to information, and then we try to make sense of this information in our heads. So one of the things which Professor Miguel mentioned in his talk as he was trying to distinguish information and knowledge is what, and he said that knowledge is not something that results from information, but knowledge is necessary to process information. So this processing of information is something that we can call as sense making. And right now, when we have this information that's being processed, it might happen that some of the questions that gave rise to the information need got answered, but some questions further remain. So this cycle sort of continues, and this person continues to look for information, and at some point, the person might decide that okay, I give up right now. So maybe the need is not completely satisfied, but the person decides to give up. So this is the cycle of information seeking, and sometimes we avoid information, as I mentioned, when we don't respond to people's calls or messages. And so this whole area is called information behavior. And when you look at it from a knowledge management point of view, this is looking at the same thing from an organization's point of view. And we can have things like information knowledge sharing over here. When we're looking at it from the individual's point of view, it is more like looking for information, but from an organization's point of view, you can have processes where individuals or groups of employees come together and share the knowledge that they have with other people. So again, even though these are simplistic things in terms of when I'm saying looking information science is concerned with humans and information and technology, but in my book I have a lot of variables that people study in our field. So these variables are things like things to do with the actor or the user, and here you have the user's abilities, personality, identity, problem-solving style, work role, tenure, experience, domain knowledge. All of these are various kinds of variables that are studied in our field. And when we have need, again, the type of need, whether it's a job or a task type, it's everyday life need. Is the need fixed, or is there a changing nature of the need? We study task, whether a task is important, or a task is complex, or it's an urgent task, the task which gives rise to a need. The surrounding environment, again, has various kinds of variables associated with that. For the information sources, again, there could be other variables associated, and things to do with the actor-source relationship and time and space and so on. So that was just a brief overview of information behavior. I'll move on to knowledge management. Now, when we think of why manage knowledge, right? And often, and again, Professor Miguel touched a bit on this. Now, knowledge management is a process of capturing an organization's collective expertise wherever it resides. It can be in databases, in paper copies, in people's heads, and distributing it so that it can help produce the largest payoff. But often the term knowledge management is misunderstood or misused a lot of the times. People think that if knowledge is something that resides in my head, can you really manage it? But often you can think of it as the ways in which it can help organizations achieve their goals. And if one were to implement knowledge management in organizations, it can lead to a lot of improvements, and it can lead, for libraries, if you implement knowledge management, it can lead to to innovation. It can lead to improvement in library services, and provided it is done right. So knowledge management has been something which has been applied in organizations since the mid 80s or 90s or so, and there have been lots of success stories, but lots of failed stories of knowledge management as well. So when we come to this idea of what is knowledge, and Professor Miguel talked about why he disagrees with this typology, and this is used very often to distinguish data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and truth as various facets of knowledge. And one of the definitions I like to talk is from the talk by Professor Brenda Derwin, who says that when people think of information, people think of information as a brick. So right now, what we are having right now is not a great interaction, because I'm not able to get the feedback from you. I'm talking to you, and I do not know whether what I'm speaking to you that is registering, or it is sort of flying off. So Brenda Derwin calls it considering information as a brick, where I take this information as a brick and I throw it out to you, and I expect you to catch it. And that's what she says is the problem with most human communication, where a teacher comes to a classroom, or a professor walks into a lecture theater and throws things at people and expects people to catch it. And you find that when you walk into a store to buy a computer, again, the person selling the computer again takes that information and throws jargons at you, and you're expected to catch it. You find that in libraries where we use terms like catalog and reference and so on, and we expect the layperson walking into the library to understand what reference really means, when we could use a simpler term like can I help you, rather than calling it reference. So there are lots of these information bricks which are thrown to people, and when people don't catch those bricks, we think that the buckets which are there in people's heads to catch these bricks are leaky buckets. They're not able to catch those bricks, and that is why there's this big problem in the way we deal with information. But if you were to look at that people as continuously making sense of information in our heads, and knowledge is not something that I possess. I mean, as something that I possess, but not that I give to you. What I give to you is information, and you take that information, and again you try to make sense of that information in your head, try to relate it with something that you already know, and then take some of it and reject some of it, and that is when you are producing that knowledge in your own heads. And again, as Professor Miguel said, it is something subjective. The whole idea of knowledge is something that is subjective and not a very fixed concept. So, and oftentimes we can think of books again as information repositories, which you read and then you try to produce knowledge inside your head. And you can think of libraries as caves of these information bricks in some manner. So again, you can think of the book as a brick in a way. And I give a book to a person and I say, read it. But again, it is not really giving knowledge. It all depends on how much the person is able to read and process from there. So there are often these two terms that are used in the field of knowledge management. Tacit knowledge is something which is the knowledge that I have of how to drive, let's say, or how to swim, which I can, or how to cook. So I might have that knowledge, but it's often difficult for me to transfer to other people. And explicit knowledge is a knowledge that we are able to write in the form of documents and brochures and books and record it in databases and so on. And oftentimes, the explicit knowledge which is there in organizations is the tip of the iceberg. What people know is much more valuable. So the very idea of knowledge management is trying to connect people with people, so that we are able to, we are creating an environment where people are able to share the tacit knowledge easily with other people, and also creating an environment where people are able to create explicit knowledge, where some of this tacit knowledge can be converted into explicit knowledge. So tacit knowledge is the majority of knowledge which is out there, and explicit knowledge is just the tip of the iceberg. So there are various processes which are there for in knowledge management, which are called the knowledge cycle processes, like processes to capture the knowledge in organization, process to create knowledge, to codify knowledge, to share and access knowledge, or to apply knowledge. And so these various processes can be seen as very similar to what is there in information behavior. When we think in terms of information need, information seeking, information use, information creation, information storage, information organization, information transfer. So it's just that in information behavior, we use the terms with attaching information to it. And in knowledge management, we attach this to knowledge cycle, and we attach the term knowledge to it. And Kimis Dalkir, in her book, she termed these as three various processes, like knowledge capture or creation, or knowledge capture and acquisition, or knowledge sharing and dissemination, and knowledge application and use. So these are kind of three basic processes which need to happen in an organization to have successful knowledge management. So this is a famous model by Nonaka and Takeuchi, and where it says that where they came up with this process, that whenever we want to convert tacit to tacit knowledge in organizations, we need to create mechanisms and tools to brainstorm for socializing. When people talk to each other, there's sharing of information and knowledge, and processes for creating explicit knowledge to convert tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. And this happens, let's say, if I were to record today's talk, then that recording becomes my process of capturing some of my tacit knowledge into some external means. And when we write a research paper or write a book, that is also a process of trying to convert what we know into something more explicit. And there's this process of converting explicit to explicit, where we try to do things like summarizing or classifying something. And when we try to understand what somebody is saying, like right now, what you are doing right now, this process of sense making or this process of understanding or learning, that is this process of trying to convert something which is explicit into something tacit. And when we read or when we understand, that is the process of tacit. So knowledge is created both in the process of reading, but it's also created when we share and interact with other people. So we need to have various kinds of tools and mechanisms in our organizations, in libraries, in library schools, and in our universities, to have all these processes in an active manner. And this is from one of my papers with Anwar Islam from Dhaka University, where we looked at this whole process from the point of view of library employees joining and leaving libraries, and how this could be applied for knowledge retention and transfer in libraries. So I won't go into a lot of detail, but I just wanted to mention this. And this is a famous model by Odell and Grayson, which talks about how we can implement knowledge management. And I worked with Professor Leila Marouf from Kuwait University to come up with a 10-step process for implementing knowledge management in universities. But this has a basic plan. So in the first phase, you need to have some idea about what do you want to really do with knowledge management. And Professor Miguel talked about innovation. So innovation could be one value proposition for knowledge management. So there has to be some need for which you want to have knowledge management. So you plan everything, you design the process, you implement, and then you scale up. But for knowledge management to succeed, you need an enabling environment. You need the right infrastructure, which is both technology and people. You need a culture where knowledge sharing is encouraged. You need technology for it, and you also need measures to see whether knowledge management has succeeded or not. So why do information behavior and knowledge management matter? So both of these are really important, because knowledge management, if done right, can really help towards innovation, and it can lead your organization towards a place where people feel valued and people feel it important to be able to share things with each other, and also when people can clearly say that they do not know when they don't know things. And for information behavior, again, it matters because you have areas like serendipity in information behavior, and again, when you create an environment where serendipity is fostered or easily enabled, that also enables creativity, and that is very important to innovation, the same way as knowledge management is. And understanding human information behavior can also lead system designers to create processes so that you can design processes, design systems, not from a system designer's point of view, but from a human being's point of view. Like as Derwin said, a body, mind, heart, spirit moving through time and space, and not just people who we stereotype and call them as users. And there is an increasing call for implementing knowledge management in libraries. So that's all I wanted to cover for this talk. I do want to take a few moments now to do a launch. Professor Kanwal Amin very kindly invited me to launch the South Asia chapter of ASIST, which is the Association for Information Science and Technology, right now at this conference. So this was something that I had as an idea for a few years, and we have a number of chapters in ASIS which are based upon geographic regions. We have chapters in various regions of the United States, and we had a Taiwan chapter for a long time, and then a few years ago we came up with an Asia Pacific chapter and also a chapter in Europe. So these became very successful chapters, and now we have, I believe, a Brazil chapter. So in the last ACIST conference, I was able to talk to Professor Kanwal Amin and also with Anwar Islam from Dhaka University, and we thought that if we could bring these countries of South Asia together, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, Afghanistan, and that's a great opportunity for having such a region with such a large population of the world and a large number of information professionals to come together and contribute to the membership of ACIS and to enrich it through having a chapter of this region. And right now in this conference, we also have Dr. Abibi, who is a board member of ACIS, and he I believe was also a keynote speaker in this conference. So I do encourage you to get actively involved with ACIS. So this is just a map of South Asia. So you can see that it's a huge region that this chapter can impact, and it is greater than 1/4 of humanity. So this is a link that we have to the South Asia chapter right now, and the purpose of the chapter is to provide an organization through which members of ACIS located within the chapter area may participate in and carry forward the programs and purposes of ACIS. Now, ACIS is an organization that was started in 1937. It's in its 81st year right now, and it's a growing organization, and but it has a huge potential to grow as well, especially from this region of the world. And it's a great privilege today to be able to launch this chapter, the South Asian chapter of ACIS in South Asia, where this conference is taking place right now. So the chapter shall promote the interests of the society and its programs and shall make every reasonable effort to involve students of information science who are located within its boundaries. And the chair of the chapter is your very own Professor Kanwal Amin, and the co-chair and chair-elect is Professor Anwar Islam from Dhaka University. The secretary is Professor Bhakti Gala from Central University of Gujarat, and I'm the chapter advisor, and I'm based in Simmons University in Boston, USA. So I invite you all to join ACIS and to join this chapter. And at this time, I would also invite Professor Kanwal Amin to maybe just stand up and say speak for a minute maybe on the chapter.
Thank you so very much, Professor Naresh, being here at late midnight, rather post midnight. I am personally obliged for taking this invitation and staying all the time here. And thank you so very much for working towards this. You have been working to this formation of South Asia chapter, and last year we have been working on that. It is my indeed a deep honor and pleasure that I would be serving as the first chair of this chapter, and launching of ACIS chapter on this conference is another privilege that we are now. After this conference, we will now work together to build this South Asian community of professionals through this chapter, and I would very much like to invite people who are already members. If their memberships are renewable, they get renewed their membership and they will automatically become member of South Asia chapter. And the students membership, one thing I appreciate this association, that student membership for these developing countries, can you imagine, is just $8 or $8 or $9. So please join hands, and it is not that I am going to work. It's just for 1 year. It's a formation phase. I need all members from here, from Bangladesh, from Sri Lanka. I'll be writing emails to people I know, but it's kind of snowball sampling. Use your contacts. build a community, and then we can further take it up to whatever we want to have our goals of bringing this South Asian region to international level and associations working like that. Thank you so very much for for giving me this opportunity to serve ASIST and South Asian chapter and working for this. I'm grateful
Thank you so
and
much.
honored.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, Shukriya.
Okay, lovely.
थैंक यू एमएस सर।
Thank you so much.
अभी आपको ऑन ही रखूं या आप
नहीं,
डिस्ट्रीब्यूट
मैं
करना है?
ऑफ कर लूंगा अभी। Thank you.
चलिए ठीक है। ओके सर,
Thank you.
गुड बाय।
Goodbye.
हाफिज।